Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Some hymns preach. Some songs preach, and that is one that'll preach. I've asked Jessica, if you notice in the bulletin, we'll be observing communion as we close our service together today, and I asked her just if she could keep that in mind as she selects our musics today, and I think she's done a great job of giving us an opportunity to really prepare our hearts and our minds for observing communion later in the service, and I hope that our message here will take us in the same direction. Week 7 in our journey together. This has just been a great marker for me as I'm just marking the weeks off summer, and we say this every time a season changes, right? Can you believe it's going by so fast? We're at a point now where the weeks behind us are more than the weeks ahead of us when it comes to summer vacation, and we're counting down to the end. I want to say, again, I've tried to communicate this every week. I'm just thankful for a church who has given me an opportunity to do this summer, but more than that, to give an opportunity to Corey to be able to, for he and his family, to give their time and their passion and their energy towards P82 and all that God is doing out there. So very, very, very grateful. I hope that our time together has been good for you as well. Sometimes people say things to you that just stick with you, and we joked about Charlie Linebaugh always having something to say. And one thing he said to me way back in youth ministry days is, Steve, anytime you get up and you talk in front of a person, you got to add all their time together. So if we spend 30, 40 minutes together and then we multiply that by the number of people that are here, you've wasted a lot of time if you blow it, right? And so those are the words that I have from Charlie Linebaugh that inspire me every time that I get up here. If it's not been good for you, if it's not been helpful, we're on the countdown. So I'm 3 more weeks for me, and then I think Ethan will be up here. I'm not sure if the order's right, but I know Ethan's going to bring a message at one point, and I think 1 week, if I'm correct, Bill and Beth will be talking about their mission and transition to Africa, and then Corey will be back in the pulpit. For the last 6 weeks before this week, we've been talking about the comeback, and I would have to admit that this series has gone longer than probably I thought it might go. When we started, I never really had a cap at the end of it, which is always dangerous, right? I didn't really have the boundary. I thought, well, let's just see where this can develop, where we can follow this. And so some of the messages have come right out of that book from Louis Giglio, the comeback. And some of them have just been tied to that theme of the comeback. That's true about today. So just to recap, week 1, we learned from the thief on the cross that it's never too late. It's not too late. We're not too far for a comeback. Week 2, we met Peter in his biggest failure of his life, and we were reminded that God is orchestrating our comeback. He is orchestrating our restoration right in the middle of our biggest failures, the biggest blow-ups that we have in our life. Then in week 3, we learned from the elder brother what self-righteousness looks like. And we talked about that self-righteousness is an obstacle to our comeback stories, that we are not going to be seeing God working a comeback in our story. We are not going to be able to let God work through us to have comebacks in other people's stories if we're holding on to our self-righteousness. Then for a couple weeks, we looked at the story of Joseph, and we were reminded that if we want to come back, it starts by doing what any person would do who was absolutely convinced that God was with them. If we are confident in God's faithfulness and we will follow him from that place, we will see a comeback. And then we realize that, hey, the greater purpose of our comeback is not for our own glory. It is for God's glory, and it's for the salvation of others that God brings comebacks to our life. And then last week, we looked at the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and we were reminded that Jesus is present and relevant right in the middle of our sickness and our death and coming back from that. All those messages, but last week, they are linked on our Facebook page for this church. So if you think, hey, I want to get that, feel free to search through our Facebook page and find those. And we'll get next week's on there soon. As we begin this week, what are we talking about this week? I want you to guess what we're talking about. But I'm going to give you some hints, all right? As I was looking at the issue we're going to be talking about this week, I did a Google search on just symptoms that a person might have if they're struggling with this issue. And so I found several lists, and I kind of tried to cut it down to 10. Top 10 symptoms that you might be struggling with this issue. These are in no particular order, just kind of put them together. As I conclude this list, I want you to see if you can guess what it is. Undercurrent of anger. That a person who's struggling with this issue might just be on the verge of just blowing up just pretty quickly, pretty easily. The second symptom is that when dealing with conflict and relationships with others, they find themselves sometimes being petty, impulsive, maybe even sometimes passive-aggressive. Symptom number 3, they struggle with a desire to control, just like an unhealthy desire to control circumstances and people around them. Symptom number 4, having imaginary conversations. Now, pause for a minute, because we all have imaginary conversations. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's what's going on in these imaginary conversations. If you're looking at me like you don't have those imaginary conversations, let me just tell you, you're the weird one, not me, all right? All right? I'm normal, you're weird, all right? These imaginary conversations where we're replaying something that's happened in our life, but it's like, well, this is what I would have said, and this is what they probably would have said, and this is what I should have said, and this is, replay. These are negative conversations that we're having. Number 5, just keeping a running scorecard of people who have wronged you, who owe you. Symptom number 6, poor self-esteem, struggling with just insecurity and guilt and shame. Symptom number 7, gossip, struggling with gossip, specifically maybe about certain people that would be connected to this issue. Symptom number 8, you love the blame game, that you struggle to take responsibility. We struggle to take responsibility for our own emotions and our own circumstances. We want to put that onto other people. Symptom number 9, you struggle to open up to or confide in others. You keep people at a distance. And symptom number 10, that it can even have a negative effect on our health. Physically unhealthy. Now, those symptoms could point, let me just confess to you, those symptoms could point to a lot of different things, right? Even those 10 put together could probably point at a lot of different things. Any guesses on what we're going to be talking about today? Anybody brave enough to put something out there? Unforgiveness, exactly. What we're talking about is that, well done, somebody's looked at my notes. If you are struggling, nobody looks at my notes, I'm kidding, just me. If you are struggling with those 10 symptoms, was that up there before you said that? Was that? Okay, I was making sure. Maybe Steve's back there conspiring to help you, I don't know. No. We're struggling with those symptoms. We might be struggling with the issue of unforgiveness. We've talked about this several times in this series, that we live in a broken world full of broken people. Now, I'm not just surrounded by broken people, I am a broken people. And that is just inevitable as we live in this world, as we navigate through the days of our life, that we are going to be hurt by people. Hurt is going to be brought to our life, sometimes minor, sometimes major, and that we're going to bring hurt in other people's lives. And our ability to seek forgiveness and to give forgiveness is absolutely essential to be healthy, both emotionally and relationally, and spiritually, and even physically. But if we're just really honest, to forgive someone is not in our natural skill set. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite of that. I don't know about you, but I'm wired to protect myself. I'm wired in such a way that if I experience hurt or pain, I want to avoid that if I can. I do not want a sequel to that experience. I do not want to repeat that. So I tend to, if you hurt me, in my mind, maybe consciously or unconsciously, that's not going to happen again. We're not going there again. You're on a list, and I'm keeping you at a distance. And we begin to harbor this unforgiveness. In fact, we kind of keep a list of people who owe us. When they hurt us, it's as if they've taken something from us, right? They owe a debt to us. There is a price to be paid. And we begin to even think thoughts of revenge and getting back. That initially, when we think about forgiveness, it really doesn't make sense. I mean, if we're going to forgive people, are we not just opening ourselves up to be hurt again? Well, I hope that I'll convince you today that really the exact opposite of that is true. That forgiveness does not lead to more pain. Forgiveness leads, we'll discover today, to healing. And actually, it is unforgiveness that leads to repeated hurt and pain and wounds. Let's hop in the Bible here. Matthew chapter 18. As I was preparing for this, and I just thought it would be just a great topic to consider as we're going to be observing communion today. So one of the first questions I was asking myself is, okay, what does Jesus have to say about forgiveness? And I read all the scriptures I could find that Jesus talked about forgiveness specifically, and we don't have time to explore all of those. The topic of forgiveness is probably a topic that could become a series of its own, but this is one of my favorite passages that talks about forgiveness. Matthew chapter 18, we're going to be starting in verse 21, as you can see on the screen. A little background, you can see actually in your Bibles what Jesus was talking about before this, several different topics, but just immediately before this passage we'll be looking at, Jesus was talking to his disciples about just how do you respond when people wrong you. And specifically, we've applied that in the fellowship of churches. When someone has an offense against you, how do you process through that? How do you right the wrong? And that's not today's sermon, but it sets us up for what Peter says to begin our passage. So Peter's listening to the words of Jesus, talking about how do we respond when people wrong us, and Peter has a very logical question. Verse 21, he says, Peter came to Jesus, Lord, how many times then shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Isn't that a great question? Tell me you haven't had that question at some point in your life. I mean, at what point do I get to turn off the faucet of forgiveness? And Peter probably should have stopped there, but then he offers a number. He throws out a number, and I have to think that maybe Peter was proud of this number. How many times shall I forgive my brother or sister? 7 times? Is that a good number? To which Jesus says, verse 22, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And I would love to have seen the look on Peter's face at that. What? What? 77 times? Jesus doesn't wait for Peter to ask follow-up questions. He does what he often does. He says, let me show you what this looks like, Peter. And he launches into a parable. Verse 23, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Perhaps your translation says 10,000 talents, depending on what we're reading. And so it's worth taking a moment to kind of consider what value we're talking about. How much did this servant owe the king? Maybe your little commentary in the bottom shows you. You can take a look at that. Here's what mine told me. That 1 talent was worth 20 years of wages for a common laborer. 1 talent was worth 20 years of labor. And so if you do the math, what I calculate there is that's 200,000 years of labor that this servant owed his king. You might disagree with my math. That wouldn't be the first time I was wrong on math. But the point is, there's a lot here. Okay, this guy owes a huge, huge debt. I wonder if it's possible in this parable that Jesus is trying to point to the debt we all owe to our Creator. Verse 25. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. So the king's like, we're just going to cut our losses here. You have no hope of repaying me. I know that. You know that. So we're just going to sell you into slavery, probably going to split up your family. I'm going to take what I can get out of you. We're moving on from there. At this, verse 26, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. To which I wonder if the audience there before Jesus didn't just chuckle a little bit to that. You're going to do what? You don't understand. There's no way you're going to pay back that much debt. In terms of what money and value that we would numbers, you owe millions. You have no chance to pay this back. But, verse 27, the servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. In an instant, a man's fate and fortune is changed. He was about to see his family split up and sold into slavery for a debt that he owed. He begs for mercy, and the king says, you got it. Cancel debt. It's gone. Verse 28. That'd be a great story if it stopped there, right? Verse 28. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him, began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. So let's just think about this, 100 silver coins. Each coin, again, my commentary is saying each of those coins is worth about a day of labor for a common laborer at this time. So this servant owed about 100 days of work. Again, I wonder if Jesus is making a comparison here between the debt we owe him and any debt anybody could possibly owe us. Verse 29, his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. The same words that the first servant used. But verse 30, but he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. And I just imagine that Jesus was such a master communicator and storyteller that his disciples at this point gasped, he did what? How could he? Verse 31, when the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled that debt of yours before because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all that he owed. How long was he going to be there? Longer than he'd had life, for sure. So let's pause for a moment and just think about this parable, this master story that Jesus tells here. Is it possible to muster up a little sympathy for this servant, the bad guy in the story? Can we just think about him for a minute? Think about the debt that was owed him. 100 days of labor was owed to him. That's really no small thing, right? Can we connect that in such a way and think about the debts that people owe us? The ways that people have hurt us, brought wounds into our lives, taken things from us. I wouldn't minimize that. In this room, can you imagine the spectrum of hurt that we have in this room? Even in each individual life, the spectrum of hurt. I've been hurt in little ways, I've been hurt in big ways. I have brought hurt to people in little ways, I've probably brought hurt to people in big ways. And I wouldn't minimize that until we take that debt and compare it to what? 100 silver coins looks like a lot until you compare it to 10,000 bags of gold. Andy Stanley says it this way. In the shadow of my hurt, forgiveness feels like a decision to reward my enemy. Why should I give that to someone who's hurt me? But in the shadow of the cross, forgiveness is merely a gift from one undeserving soul to another. What's interesting about this parable here is his audience, Jesus' audience, the disciples, what they didn't have that we have is the cross, right? That was ahead of them. What was ahead of them is behind us and still before us. And as we bring our debts and offenses that people have done to us before the cross, I would suggest we have no right to hold on to unforgiveness. Verse 35, did you notice that I didn't read verse 35? Jesus says something here that this ought to just blow us away. If you've heard that you've been in church for a long time, I would encourage you right now, let's take a fresh look at verse 35. Jesus then says to his disciples after the parable, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." Is that a fluke? Does Jesus really mean that? Is that just hyperbole? I mean, is Jesus really connecting God's forgiveness of us to our ability to forgive others? This is not the only time in the Gospels it's mentioned. You can find this at least 5 other times in the Gospel. In fact, when Jesus is teaching the disciples how to pray during the Lord's Prayer, it's part of the Lord's Prayer. Many of you have that memorized. Lord, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And then he follows up the Lord's Prayer by just reiterating that, hey, I just want you to know that part of the Lord's Prayer, I really meant that. God's going to forgive you as you forgive others. Is this a threat? I would suggest to us today that it's not so much a threat as it's a statement of reality. That forgiven people forgive people. That people who come to the cross in humility and repentance, who walk away from their unrighteousness, walk away from their self-righteousness, and come to the feet of the Jesus, realizing that this mercy and grace and forgiveness is 100% undeserved. That the natural result of that experience is to extend that same mercy and grace to other people. That if we walk away from the cross and we can't extend grace and mercy to other people, it's a sure sign we don't get it. We just don't get it. We're still struggling to understand the gospel. We're not there. So you might be thinking, as you're trying to take all this in, so really what you're telling me is, hey, we need to forgive. Okay, I got that. Kind of elbowing your, honey, get your stuff. We're going to sneak out one at a time. Meet me in the parking lot. Okay, we got this. Been there, done that. This is not new. Because I think no one's going to argue, I don't think. No one's going to come up to me at the end of the service, at this point anyway, and say, Steve, I really got a problem with what you said. You know, this forgiveness thing is way overrated. You need to correct that. That's just wrong. Nobody's going to argue that we should be forgiving until we get personal. Until we begin to point at specific wounds or hurts that we've experienced that we're still holding on to. So buckle up, because that's kind of where we're going next. I just want to challenge us to kind of look in the mirror a little bit about things we might be holding on to that we may not even be aware that we're holding on to, that we need to give forgiveness towards. And I want to tell you, how is this relevant to the comeback story? How is this relevant to this whole series? Not only do we lose the right to hold on to wounds and offenses when we stand in the light of the cross, but folks, has life experience not taught us that forgiveness is not just good for the offender? Forgiveness is good for the offended. That forgiveness is the only thing that can release us from the pain that someone has brought into our life. Forgiveness is the first step toward healing. I brought a prop. Corey sometimes brings his props. I hadn't brought a prop yet. I'm not going to go behind the door. I had it right here. Here's my prop. Forgive I'm not really trying to promote Menards. It's just on the bucket, right? Okay. I would say that unforgiveness has a very strong connection, and this is what I studied and realized even this week, to anger. Have you seen that? I want you to imagine something. You know, we haven't had our time of fellowship in the middle of a service for a while. We've been doing it before and after. But just imagine if I have this 5-gallon bucket full to the brim with water during the time of fellowship. And it's my attempt to take this 5-gallon bucket and just carry it around the room, shaking hands and telling everybody I'm glad they're here. Can you imagine? I wasn't brave enough to actually put water in the bucket and then do this. Wasn't quite that courageous. Can you imagine what's going to happen as I work my way around the room? I mean, I would say I'm probably going to struggle just even walking without some water splashing out, right? And that by the time I, start reaching hands and bumping up at people, I'm just going to be a mess. I'm going to be making a mess. People are going to be getting wet. In fact, here's what I really think is going to happen. Eventually, you're going to see me coming, and you're going to steer away. You're going other places. You're trying to give me a burr. It's just to give him some room, get out of that guy's way. Can we make the connection between that and what we do when we hold on to wounds and hurts that people bring in our life? When we refuse to let that go, we refuse to grant forgiveness, and we're just putting, okay, you hurt me, I'm keeping track of that. You owe me. There's some water in my bucket. And we just keep filling the bucket. And here's what I found about anger and bitterness and resentment. Like I don't know if I wish this, but I think sometimes we wish this, that when someone hurt me, then that would result in anger in my life, that automatically that anger would boomerang and go right back to the person that hurt me. That's not been my life experience. And I found that as I carry around that anger and that bitterness and that resentment, it often spills over and affects other relationships in my life that had nothing to do with the person who actually hurt me. Oh, my poor students. Like I'll have a rough period at school, right? Maybe it's third period, I have a rough period, and the fourth period gets to pay the price for that, right? I've tried to be real, I've tried to hold it together for 75 minutes or whatever it is, and then that next class goes and there's something that's almost unrelated, they get some water spill out from my bucket onto them. Or perhaps it's the commute home, right? You've tried to hold it together as long as you can at work, and then someone does just a little thing at home, and they get water spilled on, right? Folks, it is essential and healthy for us to deal with the water in our buckets. I was also thinking about, I don't know if you know this, you've been around boys. Boys like to play all kinds of games. I did that as a kid, and they often involve hurting each other. You ever seen this? You ever seen boys do this? In fact, they often involve punching each other, right? I remember playing all kinds of games in middle school and high school that would result in somebody getting punched. It was great. And one of those games was the flinch game, right? It's this idea that if I can come up to another guy and I can act like I'm going to punch you and you flinch, oh, now I get to punch you, right? I get to do that. Some of you are smiling because you've done this or you've seen people do this. And I would suggest to you that's kind of how we're naturally wired. Flinching is just a natural response to pain, right? Or anticipated pain. And the deal is that when we don't deal with forgiveness in our lives, we are building into our hearts and our minds flinch mechanisms to keep people at a distance so that we don't experience that hurt again. We got to deal with the unforgiveness and root out those unhealthy tendencies to flinch. So I want to ask you today, this morning, is there someone that you need to forgive? Are you holding any of that in your heart? In fact, here in just a moment, I'm going to kind of give you, there's 5 tests I want to throw at you to try to expose whether you're holding any unforgiveness in your heart. And I want you just right now to really begin to think about, just to reflect on experiences in your life. If there's anybody in your life that you haven't granted forgiveness to, who might that be? Consider it might be even a person that you think you have forgiven that maybe you have, or maybe you still have some work to do. It could be someone that you trusted, believed in. It could be someone that was a complete stranger. It could be someone who is aware of the hurt they brought to your life. It could be someone who has no idea they ever hurt you. It could be someone still involved in your life, maybe even still bringing that pain and hurt in your life. It could be someone that has long exited your life. It could be an offense that happened recently. Perhaps it's an offense that happened many, many years ago. It could be a person. It could be an individual. It could be an organization. It could be even a church. If you've been in church world very long, you may have experienced that. The church, I say that the church is a wonderful, powerful, incredible body when it does what it's supposed to do. And when the church falls short of what Christ desires, it can be very painful and wounding. If you've studied church history at all, you know there's been some sins of the church that I would say that we are still paying the consequences for today. People keeping the church at arm's length because of past sins of the church. It could be something that somebody did. It could be something that they didn't do that they should have done. It could even be just maybe somebody falling short of expectations that you had for them, whether those expectations were reasonable or unreasonable. My goal here is if you have any unforgiveness, I want to expose it. Here's your test. You thinking of somebody? First thing. The first thoughts test. What are your first thoughts of that person? First thoughts. What do they reveal about whether you have forgiven that person or not? Second test. The help test. If you were given an opportunity in which this individual needed help from you, would you step in? I feel like maybe on this one, it'd be good to have a qualifier, because I know that there are some instances of pain and wounds and abuse in which like it wouldn't be healthy for you to do that. Okay, I get that. But I'm just, even if it wasn't safe for you to help them, would you desire in your heart to do that? Number 3. We talked about the first thoughts. This one is just the emotions test. What are your general emotions about this person? What kind of imaginary conversations are you having with this person? What kind of replays are going on in your mind about this person in this scenario? Number 4, the revenge test. Do you desire to get back at them? Do you desire harm from them? Do you desire failure for them? Number 5, the prayer test. Are you able to pray for this individual? Are you able to pray for their good? Are you able to pray for their blessings? I thought those were pretty penetrating tests. So let's talk about, as we kind of head towards the last lap of this, how do we forgive? So as I thought about how we forgive, I thought about one of my favorite shows that I watch on Netflix. I'm not going to tell you what the show is because I don't want that to be distracting. Some of you will know. But the main character in a particular episode, this main character is kind of an incompetent, kind of dysfunctional guy who's having some financial difficulties. So much so that he thinks it may be necessary to go bankrupt. He's going to have to declare bankruptcy. Only he obviously doesn't know how declaring bankruptcy works, because what he does to declare bankruptcy is he's at his place of employment and he just begins to raise his voice and say, "I declare bankruptcy!" Apparently there's more to it than that, I guess, than just hollering. As we attempt or strive to forgive people, isn't there more to it than that? Isn't there more to it than just saying, "I forgive you"? Let's talk about what that looks like. The first thing I want to suggest that we do when we're forgiving people is to identify the debt that is owed. Identify the hurt. Identify what they took from you. Identify the loss. Be specific. When you were hurt, it was specific. In a specific moment, at a specific time, in a specific place. Your forgiveness needs to be specific too. Let me just admit this isn't fun. This may require you to bring up some hurt and emotions that you've been trying to suppress for quite some time. Identify the debt owed. And then, number 3, cancel the debt. Well, how do you cancel the debt? This is when it's just a decision to say, "You don't owe me. In light of the cross, in light of how I've been forgiven, in light of my debts that have been paid, you don't owe me. I release you from what you owe me." I've seen and heard about people maybe doing this in such a way that they kind of act it out, where they might write a letter, an unmailed letter, that spells out, this is how you hurt me, this is what you took from me, this is what I lost, put it in an envelope, sealed it, and then write on the outside, debt canceled. Or maybe I even heard about an instance in which an individual put a chair out, and he sat across from an empty chair, and he just had this conversation with this individual who wasn't really there, right? You got what I'm saying? And just spelled out, this is how you hurt me, this is what you took from me, this is the loss. I want you to know I release you from that. Debt canceled. Next thing I would say, the third, is to commit to the process of forgiveness. Okay. Have you ever had to do the dance with your emotions about, I thought I already forgave this person. And then something comes along and triggers this whole layer of emotions that you thought you had dealt with. You thought it was gone. And that's where we got to go back to that moment. No. You don't owe me anything. That debt has been paid. That debt is canceled. And sometimes when the wound is small, we can just do this process and it happens really quick and it's done. But the deeper the wound, the longer this is going to take. It's just going to take time. We got to take time to let our emotions catch up with our decision. It's going to take time. And the last thing I would say is the last step to forgiveness, when appropriate and wise, express your forgiveness. We can't always do this. It's not always safe to do this. It just can't always happen. But when it can happen, express that forgiveness to the person that you need to forgive. I want to, again, insert my qualifier here. I know that in this room, we probably have some very just terrible stories of pain that people have dealt with. And I would say in some instances, it's so important that we seek wise counsel on how we go through this process and what forgiveness looks like. And just help me to do this right in such a way that it doesn't lead to more pain and to more hurt. Forgiveness is the first step to healing. It may or may not lead to reconciliation depending on the situation, but it's essential for all of us. As I thought about this, and think about the instances in which I have to forgive people or have forgiven people, and I've got, as I was going through all of my notes and writing this up, I got faces in here that I'm thinking about that I need to still address and still deal with and spend some time on. Let me just admit this to you. I have no right to step into your life and look at the wounds in your life and say, forgive. I don't have any right to do that. I don't know your story. I don't know the hurt you've dealt with. These are not my words. It's not my words. These are the words of Jesus. And in light of the cross, we have lost our right to hold on to offenses and wounds. When I was a younger Christian, I used to kind of think that Christians were just naturally better at things, some things. Like Christians were just naturally better at loving others. And that Christians were just naturally better at being kind to others. And Christians are just naturally better at relationships and marriage and family. And Christians are just better at forgiving. And life experience has taught me that's not the case. That grabbing the title Christian really doesn't in itself make you better at anything. We as followers of Christ must commit ourselves to learn to be good at this. We have to become students of love and service and forgiveness and mercy and grace. It is absolutely essential if we ever, the New Testament calls us ministers of reconciliation. if we're ever going to represent Christ in the gospel in a worthy way, we have to be excellent at seeking out forgiveness and granting forgiveness. We got to be excellent at knowing how to deal with conflict and wounds in our life in a way that is healthy and honorable to Christ. Not only that, we've talked about already, forgiveness is essential to our own health, our physical health, our spiritual health, our emotional health, our relational health. So that's my challenge for us today. Perhaps the next step for you in your comeback is granting someone forgiveness. And perhaps the next step in somebody else's comeback is you granting them forgiveness or seeking out forgiveness from them. I just really think that this may be a basic issue in our faith, but it's so essential and fundamental. And I'll come back to this at the very end after communion. I just want to say that, to me, if you're looking for the seeds of revival and spiritual awakening, right here. Our ability to be on the edge of our seats, looking for opportunities to grant forgiveness and to seek forgiveness. When the church of Christ gets that, when the body of Christ understands that, people will notice. People will notice.